Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Montalvo Arts Center and Art Forum SF, in partnership with UC Berkeley, Stanford University, and UCSC Institutes of South Asian Studies, we welcome you all to the South Asian Literature and Art Festival, or SALA 2022. I'm honored and delighted to introduce today's esteemed panel of two brilliant women, each a force to reckon with. Aarti Johari will be in conversation with the New York bestselling author Alka Joshi. Aarti is a former technology professional whose deep interest in history and literature led her towards a path in the liberal arts. She has published her academic research on historical women in the 19th century India in Stanford University's Tangents magazine and on academia.edu. Aarti has also published articles and poetry in India Currents magazine, San Jose Mercury News, and other online publications. Her writing and research focuses on feminism, food, and nostalgia. She most recently served as the president of SACHI, Society for Art and Cultural Heritage of India, and she currently serves on the board of ICC in the Bay Area. Please welcome Aarti Johari. And Alka Joshi, the famous author. Born and raised in Jodhpur, Rajasthan, Alka has lived in the US since the age of 9. She has a BA from Stanford University and an MFA from California College of the Arts. Alka ran her own advertising and PR agency for 30 years, and for decades wrote advertising commercials and marketing copy. It was her husband who urged her to try her hand at fiction and encouraged her to take some writing workshops, which she realized she really enjoyed, right? So at the age of 62, Alka published her first novel, The Henna Artist, which immediately became a New York Times bestseller. A Reese Witherspoon book club pick, was longlisted for the Center for Fiction first novel and is being developed into an episodic series by Netflix. The sequel, The Secret Keeper of Jaipur, released June 2021 and will be followed by the third book in the trilogy in 2023. And we have a copy of that right here, not yet released. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome and give a big round of applause to Alka Joshi and Aarti.
Thank you, Sangeeta, for that. And thank you to our audience. Thank you all for coming here. It's really wonderful to see you. The star is here, but it is my privilege to welcome you all here and to thank the organizers of this event for the South Asian Literary and Art Festival. This is a gorgeous day, a gorgeous location. This was supposed to be my surprise. I wasn't even aware there's a copy of it. Many of you are already fans of Alka Joshi and have probably read. These are my personal copies. I know there's more in there at the book signing, but I had the privilege of reading this in 2020, completely captivated me, and more recently read the second one, and I was aware of this book, but it will be published out next year. For those of you who have not read the book, I just wanted to very briefly introduce what this wonderful trilogy is about. Extremely captivating, takes you back to, starts in post-independent India. The story is about a young, determined, ambitious young woman who weaves her life and profession in the upper society of Jaipur, in and out of the palaces, and also beautifully balances the demands and desires of her own personal life. The story has a wonderful cast of characters, extremely complex, and examines many themes that many of us can relate to, from misogyny to female empowerment, from class prejudice, to just pure art that India brings, as well as examining upward mobility. All this is done very delightfully, and we will not be able to cover so much. I've had the privilege of chatting with Alka before, and she is a wonderful conversationalist. So I would like to start, Alka, with welcoming you, thanking you for being here today, and I'd like to start with asking you a little bit about your journey. Sangeeta did tell us something, but we would love to hear a little bit more about your journey and what was the impetus in starting to write these books.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Arthi. Arthi and I actually talked before a couple of weeks ago, and she was so kind because she had gone through all of my interviews and everything. So today she's going to ask me things as I go through my little journey. And I think we'll make some relevant points here. So I never wanted to be a writer. That wasn't something I wanted to do. Some of you may want to be writers, and maybe you've been writing for years. You've been writing in your journals. You've been, showing your short stories to your parents. But I never intended to do that. I wanted to be an artist, and I love to draw and paint and sketch. But that has all really helped me a lot in terms of my writing because it taught me to observe very carefully what was going on. I was really shy, so I didn't talk to a lot of people. I just watched them. I watched the things that are going on, things that are not said that are felt. In 2008, I'd been running my agency for many years, and the recession sort of slowed everything down. So I looked around and I thought, well, what am I going to do? I've been through a couple of recessions, and I knew that it takes about 2 years for the American economy to recover. So I thought, what am I going to do in these next 2 years? It was really easy. We were living in San Francisco at the time, and there were MFA programs in writing all the time. And my husband had said to me, you're always making up stories about people anyway. You may as well learn to do it professionally. So I entered this MFA program not too far from our house, and I had some wonderful instructors. I made sure, by the way, and if you're thinking about an MFA program, make sure of this, that your instructors are people who have published in the last 5 years, because they have the network to get you where you need to be. So I'm taking all of these courses, and the henna artist becomes my thesis. Now, at the same time, my younger brother has bought a condo in Jaipur. And that is a place where we used to live at one time. We lived in Jodhpur, Jaipur, Bikaner, Banswara, and Chandigarh before I moved at the age of 9 to the United States. So my brother's bought this condo, and he says, hey, this is for the whole family. Anytime you want to come, you are welcome to stay here. So my mother said to me, let's go before your dad finds out. So I made this trip with my mom. I hadn't lived at home since I was 18 years old. So I had this very sort of intense time with my mother alone. And she shared a lot of things with me as we were in India. She shared with me, what her dreams were when she was a little girl, and how at 18, when she was first in college, her father said, you need to come home and you need to get married because you're 18 and you're a little old for us to be married. You've got 5 sisters behind you that also have to be married, so let's go. And so she got married, I should say my parents got married, and then forevermore, her life was never her own because she had 3 kids in rapid succession. She was never able to go back and finish her schooling. She never had a career. She was always at the behest of us or, the rest of the family. So I was thinking, what a remarkable woman this is. Because as soon as we got to the United States, and even way before that, she has always told me to be my own person, to make my own decisions, to decide for myself who my partner would be, my career. Like Dad always wanted us to go into engineering or medicine or any of those kind of things, and I just was always an artist, and so she knew that. The one thing that she told me is, if you're going to be an artist, you better learn how to support yourself financially, even before you get married, because your options will be limited. Also do that before you have children, and that will limit your options too. So decide for yourself what you want to do and go do it, and then if you want to get married, get married. And I just thought what a remarkable thing it was that she was able to raise me, her only daughter, with such freedom. And so I thought, I want to thank her. I want to thank her for all of that independence that she always gave me. So I started to write this novel with a protagonist named Lakshmi, who in 1955 has been estranged from her husband for 13 years. She left her marriage after just 2 years and kept herself child-free on purpose so that her options would be open. And she went on in Jaipur to become a celebrated henna artist and an herbal healer. So my mom said, well, honey, that's really nice, but you know, we're Brahmin. We're not allowed to become henna artists if Lakshmi is a stand-in for me. And so I said, well, Mom, what if, because she decorates the feet of all these ladies, what if she's a fallen Brahmin and she gets to do this? Because she has no other skills. She's never worked in an office. She doesn't have any secretarial or college skills or anything. So my mom said, okay, well, it's your book. You get to decide what you want to do. So the henna artist becomes my thesis, and then one of my instructors calls me and says, you need to do some more work on this if you're going to get it published. So I start working on it, and a year goes by, and now the economy has recovered, and I'm getting calls back from clients. So I'm busy doing that, and she wants me to work on the manuscript. I start, feeling a little like tension about the whole thing. But I finished that draft, and she sends it off to her agent, and her agent calls me and says, I love this book, I love this character, I want to work with you. And so I thought, oh, great, I'm going to be published now. This is amazing. And she said, no, you've got a lot of work to do on this novel. To start with, I would like you to think about cutting off the Radha character and making her very minimal in the book. So then I go on to cut 140 pages out of the novel, which, if you've ever had to do something like that with work that you had labored over, it's really like cutting your arm off. It's really hard. And I didn't want to do it. I tried all kinds of ways to put Radha with her own chapters in the book, and it wasn't working. So I had to cut all that out for sure. And then, she wanted me to work on the character of Malik, also cutting him out. And I said, no, I can't do that. He's a very central part of Lakshmi's life. He is the one person that she is closest to. Everybody else in her life is kind of distant, and she doesn't want to tell them about her real life. She doesn't want to tell them that she escaped from this little village. So Malik has to stay in. And she said, okay, if he's going to stay in, then I need you to play up the Hindu-Muslim conflict. I said, Emma, that is not what I'm writing. I am writing about post-independence India. I am not writing about partition. I am not writing about poverty. I am not writing about, gundas and all these, crazy people. I am writing about how a nation rebuilds itself after having been colonized for 200 years. I am writing about how important it is for those people to find themselves and to rebuild the industries that the British have destroyed, right? 3 industries. They destroyed the textile industry, the steel-making industry, and the shipbuilding industry. And so these people have to pick themselves up. That's what I'm writing about. Also, I think that it is my responsibility as an author to create harmony and not to create division. And I said, if you go to India, you find that Muslims and Hindus do live next door to each other, do own businesses together. Our 5 biggest movie stars are Muslim, and there's no Hindu who is going to say, I'm not going to go see that movie because the Muslims are in it. So these are things that I think are my responsibility to show in this book. And so that is why Malik is Muslim and Lakshmi is Hindu. So she says, all right, fine, but make Malik minimal. And I tried to, but he is such a strong character. Everybody fell in love with him. And so then Emma proceeds to tell me about all the other things I need to change in the novel. This goes on for 3 years. I keep making changes. She keeps telling me what to do. And then I go, Emma, at what point are you sending this off to a publisher? She says, I'm not sending it off to a publisher because you're still not ready. Now, as a debut author, if any of you guys want to be an author your first time around, she said it's very important for you to be a hit the first time around. Because if if you're not a hit with your first book, you don't get a second book contract, you don't get a third book contract, you're just going to be a flash in the pan. And I cannot work with somebody like that. All of my clients get multiple contracts for their books. So I follow her advice. I keep making changes. And then she says, you need to find an independent editor now. I have taken you as far as you can go. I can't go any further. So she gives me a list. I start calling around to the independent editors. And I find Sandra. Sandra looks over all of my work. And she says, okay, it's a great novel, I really like it, but you need to make these changes. And she sends me back 8 pages of changes. And I think to myself, obviously I hired the wrong editor because I really wanted to hear that I was ready to be published now. So then I call somebody else on the list, and that turns out to be Ronit Wagman. And Ronit looks through the whole manuscript, and she says, okay, here's 18 pages of changes I would like you to make. And at that point, I had had it with making changes, and I gave up. I just said, this book is not meant to be published. I'm not going to do this anymore. And a year went by before I was looking in my drawer for the manuscript, and I saw this thing, and I read it, and I thought, hey, this is a pretty good book. Why does nobody want to publish this? And then I thought, well, maybe I'll go look at all of those editorial comments that I received. Well, it turned out that now they made a lot more sense because I had had a year away from them. And that is something that authors do that you should know about. We take breaks. We cannot, it's not like a constant thing. We take breaks, and so as we're taking a break, like I took a 3-month break, then I took a 6-month break, and then I took a year-long break. And that's perfectly okay to do because you need to refresh yourself, refresh your creative brain and all of that. So I go through all of that, and then I start making changes. And a year goes by again before I send it all back to Emma and say, I'm not making one more change, Emma, before you send this off to a publisher. I have done everything you asked me to do. And she says, all right, hold on to your pants. Fine, I'll do that. And at this point, I had done 25 revisions, something like that. And also, I had... it had 9 years had passed, 9 years from the time I started. So be prepared. It just is ready when it's ready. You cannot force it to be ready. So she sends it off, and then within 2 months we have a publisher, HarperCollins. And now I have a new editor at HarperCollins, Kathy, and she has changes that she wants me to make, including changing the ending and changing one of the characters' trajectories. So I think that's okay because I have a signed contract. I can do this. And in 2 years or 18 months, my book is going to be out. There is a release date that is on your contract that you have to honor. So I start working on it with Kathy. She makes a whole bunch of edits. And now my book is ready to go off to the printers. There's a 6-month lag between that period and then the period that it's actually shown up in bookstores and in libraries. So I start working on novel number 2 because Malik will not leave me alone. After you've been living with these characters for over 10 years, they become a real part of your life. And they're like eating at the breakfast table with you. They're going on walks with you. You are sleeping with these people. And so, I thought, okay, Malik is telling me what to do, and so I start writing his novel. Now my release date comes up, and that was March the 10th, 2020. And that was a day before the World Health Organization said, everybody needs to shelter in place. And Alka, your novel is going nowhere because we can't even get it into bookstores at this point. The bookstores are shutting down. The libraries are shutting down. Everything is shutting down. And so I just thought, well, shoot me now. I mean, I have worked so long on this and nothing is going to happen. So that's when I started reaching out to social media. Now, a year before, Kathy, my editor at HarperCollins, had said, you got to get on social media. You've got to do something because you have no presence. And I said, well, what about all the advertising and marketing stuff I've done? She said, that does not count. Like in the literary world, nobody cares about that. You have not written a short story. You have not written anything for a major journal. You have not done anything that's literary. So she said, you got to be on social media. So I went on Facebook, I went on Instagram. I found this great book community on Instagram, and that's where you need to go if you want to be a writer. So all of a sudden, book people start responding, book fans. And then I have this idea. I'm going to reach out to bookstores and to book clubs and say, hey, you guys, you got to spend some time with me talking about this book because I don't have anybody to talk to. I'm also on lockdown. And all of a sudden, people started responding. So to date, I have done about 850 book clubs on Zoom.
It was a very difficult time, and that's when I first read this book. So I think that is commendable, something that you bring up. I do need a mic. Tim had reminded me about this. So I understand, had you planned this to be a trilogy?
No, not at all. I was just writing the first book to commemorate my mother and to commemorate how the Indian people had been so resilient after independence. I had no idea until Malik said, you've got to write my book. And then after I was done with that book, then I realized Radha is barely even in The Secret Keeper of Jaipur.
That's right.
And so I thought she needs her own book because I knew all of those years, 9 years that I was writing, that Radha would go off to Paris. She would elope with this Parisian guy and then get into fragrances because she was so good with the chemistry of developing henna. Then she was really good with old man Munshi in the village, developing his paints. So she's got chemistry in her head. So
and she'd been talking to you.
Yes, and she's been talking to me. So then I start writing the third book, The Perfumist of Paris.
So Alka, I'm going to intervene here. One thing that struck me, I haven't yet read this because Alka just showed me this. I didn't even know it was at this stage. But you just mentioned the chemistry, and the henna artist is about a henna artist. But then you talk also about her being a healer and how she uses food as medicine. Whether it's as an antidepressant or just as a little pick-me-up. You also very evocatively have the sights and smells of India. And I was introduced to Bengali dal with drumsticks. I had to look it up. I was like, does this exist? So that is an incredible part. So you sort of have food as medicine, you have herbs as healing, and then you have plants with perfumes. So was that part of your research?
Yes, a lot of it was research. But as I said, I really wanted people around the Western world, I don't think they appreciate India for the rich cultural heritage that we have. And so I really wanted people to understand this beautiful art of mehndi that we, decorate our hands with, our feet, that it's such a big part of a bridal culture. I think that was where the mehndi came in. And then I really wanted to talk about the natural herbal remedies that we all grow up with, right? Because my mother said, chew some fennel seed if you've got indigestion. My father drank chach, all the time, with his buttermilk. Buttermilk is so hard to find in this country. Yeah. Also, every night now, my father is 93 years old, and he still drives his car and walks and plays bridge. And I think the reason for that is because he drinks no longer, black tea, but he drinks hot water with all the spices that you would put in tea. And I think that is a wonderful way for, I think, all of us in India to keep ourselves healthy. People in the Western world don't know these kinds of things. They rely on medicine, the Western medicine. And I want them to know that there is no harm in also prescribing to the Eastern remedies that we all grow up with. I don't think there's any conflict in those two remedies.
And you bring that up with Dr. Kumar, right?
Yeah.
You very, very nicely put that in. So you have Western medicine and Eastern medicine.
Yeah.
And our henna artist then evolves to be more of a healer.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you, you talk a lot about strong women. And one of the themes that struck me was it's something that's very pertinent, that's very global, and that I think a lot of people can relate to. It's a woman's choice to be a mother. And especially when motherhood itself, we have the Indian culture of may you be the mother of 100 sons, you have the whole motherhood and apple pie, and yet you chose to focus on someone choosing to be a mother or not. And then also juxtapose that with something else, with education. So would you like to comment on that?
So my whole premise is that women deserve agency in every part of their lives. And a lot of women do not get that agency. It's very important, I think, to raise daughters to have agency so that they can make their own choices and good choices in life. So we have Lakshmi, who chooses not to have children, but we have Radha, who desperately wants children. And then we have Kanta, who cannot have children and chooses to adopt. So I think all three of those are valid choices, and they are choices that women should make. I also think that women are extremely resilient. They raise their families, they raise children, they keep everything together. But I don't think that women often get the recognition for that. So I think that this is very important. All of you mothers know how hard you have to work, much harder than the men in your life. I'm sorry, men, but women work way harder than you do.
Yes, and I think you talk about those choices. Lakshmi's life is not easy, and she enters into these wonderful palaces and sees this great life, and then goes back to her own home, which she treasures and designs so beautifully. So I think you juxtapose that very, very well. And you mentioned that you decided to write this book, starting in the 1950s with the newly independent India, analogous to Lakshmi, who's pushing herself and trying to move ahead. And the locations you chose were Shimla as well as Jaipur, which I think were both familiar to you. Yeah. I love that you took us into the palaces of Jaipur, and I was wondering, one of the things that you discuss is Lakshmi is a healer. She goes in, she's there every event, painting people's feet or hands. But she's more than that. She's a mentor to some, she's a confidant, she's a friend. So there's a relationship of interdependence, even though she's economically dependent on that. Was that a role that you had studied or you discovered?
I think, doesn't she ask the best questions? I've never had such complicated and interesting questions. Thank you, Aarti. I think that another point that I'm trying to make is none of us goes it alone. We all need each other, and we all need to be dependent on each other. So men are dependent on women, women are dependent on men, and children are dependent on families. These are very important things for us to recognize. No one goes it alone. I mean, if you think about publishing this book, think of all the editors I've had, the instructors I had in college, my mom and dad giving me so much information about the 1950s in India. I couldn't have done any of that alone.
Absolutely. In fact, I think that's what really appealed to me is that your book is not about black and white characters. Even the high society philanderer has a soft corner. And then, you also talk about the loneliness in the palaces and the benevolence of the queens, which is something that growing up in India, I learned about. I don't know, did you want to add something about that?
One of the things that Mom told me is that in Jaipur, when Mom and Dad were getting ready to leave for India, the Maharani Gayatri Devi held an audience for all of the wives of families who were leaving to study abroad or whatever. And so my mom got a chance to sit down for tea with this Maharani. And I thought, what a wonderful thing. Mom said she was always accessible. She was always driving around in her Bentley, which is why the young Maharani does that. She would stop and talk to people, and you could always see her at the Jaipur Club. She was playing polo or tennis or golf or whatever. So that is one thing I put in there. And I have to divert a little bit. Dad told me about in 1966, there was a war in the border between India and China. And the Indian government asked for gold because they needed gold in order to buy munitions. And so my dad took my mom's wedding gold and he gave it to the government without my mother's knowledge. So you will see that that is partly what happens with Lakshmi's parents, that the mother is very upset with the father and always blames him for not having any recourse at home for their sort of straitened circumstances because he sold the gold without telling her.
Actually, you do talk about gold, and especially in the second book, that actually was going to be one of my questions, so great lead over there. You do talk both about the Indian obsession almost with gold and how important it is, and also hint at the black market, the smuggling. So, did you want to share a few more sentences about that?
Yeah, I've always been intrigued by okay, so I like silver because I think silver goes better with gray hair and with my complexion.
It's timeless.
Yes. And my mother would say to me, "What are you wearing that costume jewelry for? Why don't you wear 22 karat gold? That is the real metal." And so, I would think, why are Indians so obsessed with gold? And why does gold have to be such a large part of a wedding? And so, what happened, and so I started looking this up. And what happened is that, the Indian government realized that in weddings, when gold is given, a lot of families hold on to it, and then they pass it on to their daughters, and then daughters after that. So everybody was hoarding gold, which was decreasing the value of the rupee. So then they decided to put all of these gold controls in place and said, okay, you know what? Everybody only gets to have a certain amount of gold, and jewelers can only sell a certain amount of gold. So what that did, of course, is open up the black market, which, as we know, in India is a really big way to make money. So then, a lot of people were doing this black market stuff, and that's why in The Secret Keeper of Jaipur, people are trying to ferry this illegal gold from the northern borders down into the central part of India. And then jewelers like Motilal are taking a part of that gold and sell it legally, and then part of it illegally in their little sort of warrens that are away from the tourist gold that they sell.
I think Sangeeta had mentioned this earlier. I think that's why your books appeal to all of us, because you really transport us. Many of us have grown up hearing these stories. The one that you talked about, the 1962 war, is something I grew up hearing about. So there's a lot that appeals to people. I will open up for audience questions shortly, but I want to ask you one thing more. You've mentioned you're on Instagram, you've mentioned social media, and I know you have everyone I send this to was like, Alka Joshi, oh my God, she's amazing. Oh my God, I did my book club with her. She's fantastic. There's all this talk. I'd love to hear what are some of your favorite feedback, or what's something surprising that you've heard in your fan mail?
Well, and I hope I don't cry when I say this, but
we'll allow you to. It's okay.
So many people come up to me and they say, I get this novel because this was my mother, this was my grandmother, this was me. I've even had people from India call me and say, how did you get my life so well? And I think that the money is nice, when you sell books, but I think it's far more rewarding to hear from people who say, you have changed my life. This is the reason why I'm going to choose a career that I always wanted to choose and I didn't get a chance to. Or I'm going to find a new way to live my life that I think will be a far more rewarding life for me. So I think that, that's the kind of comment I get. I had a 90-year-old man from Slovakia write to me and say, I've never been to India and I don't know any of your people, but I feel in reading your book that somebody from the neighboring village is telling me a story. So it reaches people far and wide, and the book has been translated into 26 languages. So I hear from people all over the world whom this resonates with.
Absolutely. I think I can resonate with that. And I think there's also a Netflix series coming up, right? We should
Yeah.
mention that. So,
Yeah.
but I say don't wait for that. There's nothing like reading a book. And I think all of you are here because you are book lovers. So if you don't already have a copy, we do have them over here. And Alka is, of course, available to sign. Sangeeta, I think it's time for me to open up to questions so that we are. So are there audience mics, or I think we can speak up?
My name is Purnima. So you were talking about all the edits that you had to go through, right? All the characters had to be changed. So with the characters changing, did you have to change the plot? So is the book that you have right now, is it the same book that you had envisioned? Or is it an entirely different book?
I think it's a far richer book than I had envisioned. So, for example, I might say something in the early novel like, that really angered Lakshmi. And I had one of my editors say, what does that feel like in Lakshmi's body? So go deeper. Tell me, does this make her forehead hot? Does it make her feverish? Are her hands clammy when she feels a certain thing? You need to go deeper with each of these characters. So that was a layer that I added. And then as I did more and more research, that was another layer I could add. And then as I talked about herbal medicine, that was another layer that I added. So it became a lot richer. And I think that one of the other things that, like this was my agent who had me do this. She said, can you please look at the character of Hari? Hari is so mean. He is constantly bugging Lakshmi for money. And she said, I just don't see that you have given him dimensionality. Every one of your other characters is a three-dimensional character. Mm-hmm. They have good in them, they have bad in them, they have ugly in them, all the things that all of us people have in us. But Hari is the only one that has two dimensions. He's mean. And so she said, why don't you think about that? So I thought about him, and then I wrote out a backstory for him. And I thought, okay, he was raised by a single mother in a village. And we all know that boys, maybe not so much today, but boys are considered God's gift to man. And so Hari was raised to think that he was, a guy who could have everything in his life. And so when he marries Lakshmi, he thinks that he should be able to bed her any time that he wants. And Lakshmi has another idea for herself. She won't do it. So he, I think, eventually gets really upset when he finds out that she is deliberately keeping herself child-free. And when she is doing that, she is going against the grain of what Indian society believes, which is that you should all have children. You should all have, within the first 2 years of marriage, you need to have a child, or people start asking questions and wondering what you're all about. I think that Hari just got madder, and then the gossip eaters came in, and the village is starting to rumor, like, what's wrong with Hari. So Lakshmi ends up leaving, and then I think 13 years have passed. During those 13 years, Hari starts helping his mother with her business, and he starts learning what it is to care for women who have no one else to care for them. And he gains some humanity, and that humanity humanity spills over into the time that he actually sees Lakshmi 13 years later. She doesn't know that he's changed, and so she treats him, badly, but then we realize that he actually has changed. So that was a way in which a character changed. It didn't change my book, but it did change the ending. Because in the ending, originally, I had Samir saying goodbye to Lakshmi, and that made no sense at all when you think about how Samir has betrayed her. So then I thought, okay, it needs to be Hari who's saying goodbye to her, and they're both wishing each other well because they both betrayed each other.
Yeah, but it's Hari's mother who really taught Lakshmi, and that's another very wonderful aspect. You show a very positive mother-in-law relationship. So
Yes.
Yay! Yes, I knew the women would relate to that. So I think there's a question.
So first, thank you for sharing your writing and publishing tips. Very generous of you to do that. I wanted to know how you balance the job, the marketing, the advertising that you did with writing the book in terms of having a job that you need to pay the bills versus writing, which didn't at the time.
I think it's because I write at 1 o'clock in the morning, I write early in the morning, I write in the afternoon, I write whenever I can, but I don't write every day. I do not write every day. In the MFA program, they taught us that you need to have a writing practice. And I think over the years, having my own business and dealing with clients and deadlines, I am really disciplined. So if somebody tells me you got to have chapters 1 and 2 ready for me by such and such a date, I have it ready. I think it's very disappointing for people when they give you a deadline and nobody meets it. So I think I'm just really practiced at meeting my deadlines, and I will work for either client or for agent as much as I can during any given day. And if that means I only get 4 hours of sleep, then I only get 4 hours of sleep.
Alka's like Lakshmi, wearing many hats and, working as hard. I mean, I thought of that. I read this a second time recently, and I was like, I think I know where this person comes from. A question right here.
Yeah.
My question is a little bit different, more about when I think about books written with a historical context, I feel that where many authors lose the audience is the research that they do maybe doesn't seem real and authentic.
Yeah.
So are there any tips, suggestions, things you have for us about what you did to make sure the research is done right so that people can really be drawn into what's really happening?
Okay. My research was threefold. One is, as I said, I talked to my mom and dad. I talked to anybody in Jaipur. I took all those trips to Jaipur so I could talk to people my parents' age and find out what it is, they felt about that period. And then, and one of the things my dad said is, he's a civil engineer. So he heard the call at that time where everybody wanted an engineer in the family and everybody needed engineers to rebuild India. He heard that call and he said, Alka, it was such an exciting time to be rebuilding because he was building roads and dams and bridges that did not exist in India. The British left everything so much in chaos. So he, told me a lot of stuff. My uncles told me a lot of stuff. I have a nephew who is an Ayurvedic doctor, so he told me a lot of that kind of stuff. The second thing I did was I read a lot of books that were either written by Indians during that time period or major historical texts that told me a lot. The third thing I did was watch movies from that time period, right? India produces something like 2,500 movies a year. And so there's lots of movies during that time period that you can watch for how people were dressed, how they treated one another, what was the class divide like. It's all there for the taking.
But I think there's a skill of the writer. And a very specific example that I think of is when you talk about her learning intricate designs from the courtesans in Agra. The courtesans are from Istanbul and Marrakesh.
Arti, I made all of that up.
I know. you told me this, and I was like, really? Is that where that came from? So it sounds very genuine. That's exactly my point. You also made up about the gold trade. Did you want to share that? So when we had the conversation, that's exactly, as a reader, it seems very genuine. I was like, really? And she's like, no, I made that up.
Western audiences think that every henna artist does the same kind of art that Lakshmi does, and I totally made it up. See, that's where my artist sort of leaning comes through, right? And so I thought, if I were going to be a henna artist, what would I put on people's hands and feet and bodies? Oh, I know. I would do it according to what they needed. So I'd read this article about figs, and there were 50 different species of figs. Each one of them requires a special wasp to fertilize them. And when that wasp fertilizes the fig, it dies. So whenever we eat figs, we're eating a desiccated wasp, but you'll never taste it. But I thought, and this is where my mind goes, I thought it was kind of sexy that this wasp is so sated that he dies inside this fig. And Parvati wants that kind of experience with her husband for the afternoon, right? And so I thought, okay, so then what Lakshmi is going to do is to draw a fig and a wasp on Parvati's feet.
That's the skill of a writer. That honestly is. We have a question here. Did you want a mic?
Thank you again for being here. You mentioned that much of your book is informed by the experiences of your mother, post-partition. While reading your book during COVID, it got me very interested and curious about the experiences of my grandmothers, my great-grandmothers. We speak a lot in today's culture about multi-generational trauma. I think we need to speak more about multi-generational joy and how these experiences have really informed the way that people raise their own children, the choices that they make. So can you speak a little bit about how those conversations with your mother went when she was being vulnerable, when she was sharing things that she had maybe been taught don't talk about, and how important it is for mothers to be having these conversations with their daughters?
Yeah, what a good point that is. I think it is very important for mothers and daughters to talk very realistically about what they felt and what the experience was. And my mother told me things that of course, I'll never put in a book. But there were things that she could tell me that I could put in a book. And, if you are writing about real people, you definitely have to parse the very personal things that you want to talk about or not want to talk about from the other things that you do want to put in your books. I always change the characters' names. I change sometimes their gender. I sometimes change their age, all of that. But yes, mothers and daughters do need to have these frank conversations. And I couldn't have had them with my mother before. I used to ask her all kinds of questions and she would deflect because she had been raised never to talk about those things. But I was in my 50s. My mom was in her 70s when we started talking about these things, and I think at that time she was ready to do that. Another thing you should know about my mother is that in her 60s she decided to get a divorce, and when she got a divorce she just blossomed. She just turned into this very happy person. She was always telling jokes and showing me that side of herself that I never got to see when I was growing up with her, and I think that was an amazing sort of experience for me and for her.
Alka's not advocating that for all of us, but
no. And my dad is an amazing person, and I love him. I love both my parents, but it's a very different relationship that they've had. The other thing is that my dad reads. He's my first reader for all of my novels, and he tells me what is correct, what is not correct, what is working, what is not working. And he's so proud. He's so proud.
I'm sure. I think your mother did not read the final manuscript, but she lives in the books for sure. I see a question at the back.
Now that your trilogy is done, what are you working on?
Oh,
Yes.
I'm working on book number 4, and it's not part of the trilogy, but it takes place in 1937. And for some reason, Dr. Kumar has worked his way into this novel. I don't know how he did it. It's very insidious, and he's a young doctor at this time. He's doing his residency. And it is about an Anglo-Indian nurse and what happened to Anglo-Indians right before the independence. She's taking care of a painter that some of you might know about, Amrita Sher Gill, who was an amazing woman that I think very few people in the Western world know about. So here, once again, is my nod to what Indians have contributed to society that they may not be aware of. So, and Amrita Sher Gill died very early at the age of 28, and she, I think that she lived hard and died young, and I sort of wanted to capture that, part of her.
That's wonderful. We're all looking forward to that. And when will that be published, do you think? I'll finish this in this week, so.
Well, first, Aarti, I have to write it.
But it's all there, right? It's all there. We'll take one more question because I know there's a book signing. I think there's a question back there.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. It's been really illuminating. As a fellow author, I'm always curious about other people's processes. So how much research do you typically have to do before you're like, oh, I have the idea, I'm going to start writing? And then secondly, do you outline? Do you just start with an idea and just go for it?
I do not outline. What happens to me is I see scenes very visually. And as I'm seeing them, I am noting, whether there's a soffit, whether, there's a man standing there doing our videotaping, whether there are lights in the room and what they look like. So I see all of this stuff, and then I start imagining the people in the room. And I see the people in the room. I see them whether they're talking to one another, whether they're yelling at one another, whether they're making love, whatever it is they're doing. So then that scene will lead to another scene that I see, and then another scene after that. So mine builds as I go along. I do research all the time, and we writers can go down rabbit holes of research. When Samir was giving Lakshmi that little pocket watch, oh my God, I went into such a rabbit hole, and I thought, oh, I love these Victorian watches. I want to get one for myself. So we research all along, and Google is my friend.
That's wonderful. I did want to thank you, Alka. This has been a delightful hour. We've enjoyed the books. For all of you who haven't read them, I encourage you to. For those of you who have, something wonderful is there for you. Thank you all for being such a wonderful audience. Sangeeta, I'll give it to you. But Alka,
Thank you,
it's been an
Aarti.
honor. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Alka and Aarti. You ladies have been phenomenal. And if we didn't have time crunch, I'm sure we could be here for another hour listening to Alka's story. She's such a great storyteller, and can't wait for The Perfumist of Paris to be released next year. And I'm sure each one of us will be reading it and looking forward to your other stories.